Hello, welcome to another session of Q&A all about OET preparation. My name's Rebecca and I'm with you for the next 60 minutes to hear what you want to know about the OET test and to answer your questions about getting ready for your test date. So if you have a question about any part of OET, listening, reading, writing or speaking, add your question to the comments now, and during the next hour I'll work my way through as many of those questions as I can coming through. There's nothing scripted about today's session. Each of these Q&A sessions is completely different. It's all live. It's all the questions that you want answering. So if you've got something that you don't feel quite comfortable about, or you just want some reassurance or some advice or tips, this is your chance to interact live with OET and to hear our ways of supporting you. So it's great to have already 40 candidates joining us live across Facebook and YouTube, which is where we're streaming to today. And we've already got a few questions coming in, so let's get started straight away. This question, in fact, from Fuz came through just before the session started, so I'll start with that question today. And there's two parts to the question. The first part is about whether articles are important in reading part A, and then there's another part of the question which is about listening. So, Fuz, in fact, candidates often ask this question for both reading and listening A. They say, do I need to include the article to get the answer correct? And to reassure you, articles don't usually form part of the answer for OET reading and listening part A. If you go and look at the sample tests that are available from the OET website, you'll notice that where an article could be part of the answer, it's included in the answer key in brackets. And any word or words that is provided in brackets on the answer key is considered optional. So if you have included it as part of your answer, it won't make any difference to your final score for that question. If you haven't included it, it also doesn't count against you for your final answer for that question. So articles are optional for listening and reading A. It's not something you need to particularly worry about for your answers. And then the second part of the question, in listening part A, if the answer is barium, swallow, and then in brackets, as I've just been explaining, test, and I have a mistake in the word test, would you consider the answer wrong? So because this is one of those optional words provided in brackets, any spelling mistake given there wouldn't be focused on, because it is an optional word that you didn't have to write down. So hopefully those have answered your questions. Let's move on to this question from Sonia, who's on YouTube. And Sonia's question is, I am writing on behalf of Mrs. Dawson, who requests a home visit for her husband, Mr. Bob Dawson. Is this a correct introduction? Now, Sonia, in terms of writing a letter, this sounds pretty good. There's something a little bit that you would need to change about the grammar, who has requested a home visit or who requested. So in terms of your language, it's pretty good. In terms of whether this is something that you would write for OET, writing on behalf of the patient is not something that candidates are asked to do in the OET writing test. So, maybe you're just practicing your writing skills, which is absolutely fine. But to be clear for candidates who are preparing for their OET test, this kind of letter where, as I say, you're writing on behalf of the patient's husband or wife or partner isn't something that you will need to do in the test. For all of our OET professions, there are always 3 types of letter you might be asked to write, and in those types of letter you're being asked to write as a healthcare professional to another healthcare professional. So you might be writing a referral, a transfer or a discharge letter. Now, for some OET professions, for example, pharmacists, speech pathologists, and occupational therapists, you may also be asked to write an additional kind of letter, which is an information letter. And for those professions, there is an opportunity that you are writing to your patient. and that's why it's called an information letter. But if you're not one of those professions, then referral, transfer or discharge are the only types of letter you'll be asked to write, and you'll be writing as a healthcare professional to another healthcare professional. Mohammed is asking about how the score is calculated in speaking, because in your opinion you only did well in the second card. Now, firstly, Mohammed, I want to reassure you that I expect there are a lot of candidates, perhaps even in today's session, who empathise with you. They feel like their nerves were such that the first card didn't go as well as they would like. They feel like they warmed up and they did a much better job of the second card. So don't be too hard on yourself. It is a nerve-wracking situation taking any kind of test. The way that your speaking test is scored is across both role plays. So your speaking performance from both role plays is looked at together. And each assessor, of which there are 2 for each candidate, will be scoring your speaking performance from those 2 role plays against those 9 assessment criteria. So there are 5 clinical communication criteria, which are all scored out of 3, and 4 linguistic criteria, which are all scored out of 7. And so overall, your performance, if your good performance in role card 2 balances out your perhaps weaker performance in role card 1. And to be honest, we don't know that it was that bad. You might just be feeling less confident about that role play, but you may still have done it very, very well. The assessors are looking at your performance across both role plays together, and that's how they end up with the final scores that are put forward for conversion into your grade and numerical score. Maria on YouTube is asking for tips about reading in general, so parts A, B and C tips. So Maria, because you're asking for general reading support, I'm going to recommend to you our Reading Week playlist. This goes back to last year, and I'm just going to type Reading Week playlist into the comments and post this link so everybody can review it after today's session. This playlist contains 5 videos, each roughly an hour long. 3 of the videos take a part of the test in turn. So 1 video is for part A, 1 for part B, 1 for part C. And 2 videos talk about how you can develop your reading skills, how you can develop a reading habit, how you can work on and identify your weak areas so that you improve in your reading performance overall. Things like working on your stamina, on broadening your vocabulary, and as I say, developing a reading habit by including reading every day in what you're doing. So that playlist is really a fantastic place to go and get lots of tips. Those sessions that I mentioned that cover A, B and C also talk about reasons why candidates often lose marks unnecessarily, so the kinds of mistakes that they're making, perhaps not by checking their spelling carefully enough in reading part A, not really spending enough time understanding what the question is asking in parts B or C. Those sorts of tips and advice is all built into those sessions. So I hope you find that playlist really useful. Sonia's come back with another question, which is, can we use so as a connective? Is it outdated? No, there's nothing about connectors that go out of date, and certainly you can use so in a way that would be appropriate for the situation. We wouldn't usually start a sentence in formal writing with so, but within the sentence you can certainly make use of so to suggest a sort of a cause and effect relationship within the sentence. That's absolutely fine. With these kinds of questions around grammar and what you can expect on the test, I'd like to recommend that you have all visited our blog pages. So you can find our blog pages from the Ready section of the OET website. I'm just bringing it up so I can again post the link into the chat. So we've got so many different blog articles available, and these cover each subtest, but also things more specific like grammar and punctuation. And if you were to go to the blog articles and look up grammar, or if you just search within the OET website for connectors, you would find very helpful articles that would include information such as this one that you've asked in that question, Sonia. All right. So we've talked about reading tips, and now Ishwarya is asking for some listening tips. So the good news is, Ishwarya, we also have a listening week playlist, which, much the same as I was mentioning for the reading playlist, is 5 sessions. 3 sessions cover each part of the test. So 1 session for part A, 1 session for part B, 1 session for part C. And then 2 sessions focus on how you can develop your listening skills, how you can develop a listening habit, how you can improve your familiarity with accents, and these sorts of things that form common weak areas for candidates. There's also, in the same way that there is for the reading playlist, tips and advice about common mistakes candidates make in each part of the test and how you can avoid them for your test day itself. And Hashani on Facebook, I think that playlist is going to be really useful for you as well. So part of that, the first session of those 5 that I've mentioned, talks about how to identify where your weak areas might be in listening, and therefore what you might need to work on to improve. And there are many reasons why candidates might struggle with listening. One of them, as I've mentioned, is unfamiliarity with the accents that are commonly used in OET. So commonly accents come from Australia, the UK and the United States, and it's a mix of all those accents. So making sure you do some regular practice listening to those accents is a really good idea. Other candidates might struggle because of their vocabulary. They need to increase the range of vocabulary they have to understand all of the audio that they're hearing. Could be that they're less familiar with lay language, which is the words that patients use to talk about their health and their situation. So in part A, for example, there's a lot of lay language that's being used in the audio, but on your question paper, it's technical language that a healthcare professional might use. So it may be that you need to work on developing your understanding of lay language and how it would be expressed in technical language. So this playlist really talks you through a lot of those skills that you need to develop, how to identify your weaknesses and how to work on them. Sulwan, I don't know if you did that on purpose, but in your question, you've actually included a spelling mistake. So it should be spelling, not spilling, which is a completely different word. And it actually gives me a good way of explaining a common reasons that candidates do make mistakes. I expect, Sulwan, in your speed, you made this typing mistake and you perhaps didn't notice that you'd made the mistake. This happens frequently for candidates either taking the test on paper or on computer, trying to write down the answer quickly or type down the answer quickly. They make a spelling mistake and they don't notice it in the checking time, and so it's submitted for assessment. Now, here where you'd meant to write the word spelling, but you've used a different word which has a very different meaning, spilling, is an exact example of why assessors cannot score you correct, even though they might imagine you had meant to write spelling. Because you've written spilling, which has a very different meaning, they can't give you the benefit of the doubt. They have to go with what you have written down. So this is an excellent example of why it's so important that you use the checking time to check your spelling in listening part A to avoid losing mistakes unnecessarily. you do need to be as accurate as you can with your spelling in listening part A. And again, if you look at the answer keys for the sample test on the OET website, where I was saying earlier you can find answers that are in brackets, meaning those words are optional, you can also see from the types of answers in the answer key that they're very straightforward words. The vast majority are adjectives or nouns. They're single word answers only, and they're very common words that patients and healthcare professionals would know. So it is important that you try and spell as accurately as possible as you're writing the answer down, but more importantly, you use the checking time provided to you to check your spelling, to correct any mistakes that you might have made, because mistakes will count against you in your final score. Those words that, as I said, are very commonly known and understood by patients and healthcare professionals, you are expected to spell correctly to get that answer correct. Davey, perhaps asking a follow-up question to the part I was talking about earlier, the types of letters that candidates may be asked to write in the writing test. What are the differences between a transfer, a discharge, and a referral letter? I'm actually going to start off by saying the differences are very minimal, because in fact the way that you approach all of those letters is exactly the same. So regardless of whether you're writing a referral, a discharge, or a transfer letter, the way you approach your letter is exactly the same. You need to decide why you're writing the letter. What's the main purpose? What information do you need to communicate to the reader so that they can continue providing care to the patient? What are you expecting them to do as action points as a result of reading the letter? So that makes no difference regardless of whether it's a referral, a transfer, or a discharge letter. To be honest, the main difference is the way that you start the letter. In a very simple sense, you might start by saying, I'm writing to refer, I'm writing to discharge, I'm writing to transfer. That's the main time where those differences really show up in that language in your first sentence. Of course, you might not use that word even if the writing task says to write a referral letter. You could use a number of other appropriate verbs, such as I'm writing to request, or I'm writing to update you when you're perhaps discharging a patient. So the language isn't set in stone, but that's really the only time where there's a difference between the three types of letter. After that, as I said, the way that you choose the content, you decide how to organise the letter, it's the same for all letter types. There's no difference between them. Daniel is after more official OET listening materials. So Daniel, you've found our sample tests, which is great news, from the OET website, oet.com. Now you've worked your way through those. There are more materials available for purchase from the OET store. These materials are also of the same quality as the test day standard that you'll have on your test day. So I'm going to add the link to the store onto the comments now. For example, there is a practice book of 3 sample tests available for every OET profession. For doctors and nurses, there is what's called an OET trainer book. So there's a medicine version and a nursing version. They contain 6 further sample tests. There's also other course books. There's one specifically for listening and reading, another one for reading and speaking and writing, so one for listening and reading, one for speaking and writing. So there's a lot of materials. OET also has a listening course. So if listening is something that is a particular weak area for you, you could consider investing in the OET listening course to improve on your skills for that as well. And that course also includes a sample test. Nasrin on YouTube is asking about how remarking works for listening. So remarking for any subtest is the same in terms of you must apply for remarking within 5 calendar days of receiving your OET results. That's the window that's open for you to request a remark. After that time, it's not possible to request your test is remarked. So you must get your request in within that 5-day window. Then your test answers, again for any sample test, your test answers are sent to 2 different assessors, to the ones that originally scored your paper, and they will assess your paper again. Now, where listening and reading are different to speaking and writing, because listening and reading parts B and C are computer marked, and quality checks are done on that computer marking at the time of your original test results being produced. Only part A of listening and reading will be reassessed during the remarking stage, because that's the only part that was human marked in the original marking stage. So for listening, if you've applied for a remarking of listening, your listening part A answers are given to 2 different assessors. They use the same answer key to score your answer and to produce the result that you're then given for remarking. Now, I would say for listening and reading, in the majority of cases, your score will not change. The likelihood of 2 different assessors finding results that are different, having used the same answer key and no changes obviously having been made to your original answers, is unlikely. But it's certainly your opportunity to request a remark if you feel your result did not reflect your performance on test day. So hopefully that helps clarify things for you. Jessa on YouTube is asking for tips about speaking. So speaking, we haven't talked so much about speaking yet today. In the speaking test, of course, you are completing 2 role plays. You always take the role of the healthcare professional, and you could be talking to the patient, a carer or relative of the patient. So, for example, you might be talking to the parent of a child who isn't present for the conversation. You might be talking to the adult child of an elderly patient who also is not present for the conversation. So you're always only talking to one person, whether that's the patient or a relative of the patient. The 2 role plays will be quite different, and so one tip that I would give you is to try and demonstrate different language, different approaches to the conversation to match the different role cards that you've been given. And that even goes down as far as starting the role play differently. For example, one role play you might be at the patient's home. Another role play you might be in the hospital, in the patient's ward, or maybe the patient has come to visit you in a clinical setting. You know, whatever the setting is, it's always a good demonstration to the assessor of your ability if you start the role play in a different way that shows you have that flexibility of language and can see what would be appropriate for this conversation. Another tip that I would give candidates is to remember it's a conversation. So some candidates, perhaps because they've tried a different English test, or perhaps a misunderstanding that they have about the way that the speaking test is assessed, think that the best way to get a good score is to do most of the talking. But as in real life, when you talk to patients, it should be a balance. You should listen as well as provide information. And there are specific parts on your role card which are designed for you to gather information from the patient and listen to their opinion, to their preferences, to their concerns, and then to respond appropriately to the information that they've given you. So do make sure you allow the patient opportunities to speak and give that information. And make sure you're fully listening to what they say so that when they have given you that information, you can make some kind of appropriate response or ask a follow-up question if you need any kind of clarification. Related to that, my other tip that I would give at this point on speaking is to try and imagine that this is real life. I think this helps you to hopefully relax during the test, but also it helps you do some of those things that you do naturally on an everyday basis as part of your work. You know, healthcare professionals are trained to be empathetic to their patients, who are trained to give good patient-centered care. And if you try and imagine that rather than this person being part of a test with you is actually an actual patient with real healthcare concerns, I think that can help you enter into your role more naturally, improve your confidence, and end up doing a much better job than if you were, you know, focused on the fact that this is a test. Aslan on YouTube says, I want to ask about the writing test. The reading time is 5 minutes and we have to remember those case notes, or we can see them during our writing time. Aslan, so I can reassure you straight away, you see the case notes throughout the writing test. So those 5 minutes are just to give you time to read and process the information on the case notes, to start thinking about how you're going to structure your letter, perhaps to think about which information would be most important to the reader, perhaps which information can be omitted. It's to give you sort of really sort of brain planning time in those 5 minutes. Once the writing time starts, the 40 minutes writing time, you see the case notes still in front of you and you can check them at any point. If you're taking the test on paper, you can obviously at that point write on the case notes. If you're taking OET on computer, you can highlight the case notes once the writing time has started. During the reading time, none of that is possible. So yeah, you have the case notes throughout the writing test. Jessa says, can we still need to have an action paragraph if we use the thematic approach? So Jessa, certainly a thematic approach is one option for the writing test. This might be appropriate if the patient has different stages of their history. So you might need to break it up by their medical history. Then you might do a section on their social history, and that would definitely make a thematic approach. But it is important, it's part of the organisation and layout criteria that you conclude the letter with all of the action points required. So we don't recommend that candidates add action points throughout the letter, so don't link an action point to the medical history, for example. It's important that you provide the context of the letter and then you finish it with the action that's required. And this is because it's considered best practice for the reader that they have all of the information they need at the end of the letter ready to work on straight away. Dinto on YouTube says, write a referral letter to the student's general practitioner. Is this a known case or an unknown case? Can a known case be asked with a referral? So Dinto, I can't specifically answer with the example that you've given me here. It's not one I'm familiar with one of our official sample tests. Typically, a referral letter means that the person you're writing to has no existing relationship with the patient, because one meaning of referral is sort of to introduce someone for the first time. That's why you may, in other parts of your life, know that companies sometimes pay a referral fee. So if you introduce somebody else to them for new business, they'll pay you a fee for it. So there is this meaning of introduce as part of referral. So typically when you're being asked to write a referral letter, it means you're introducing the patient to another healthcare professional for the first time. So that sort of covers that second part of your question. to cover the part about whether in the case notes the person knows the patient already or not, this will be clearly stated for you in the case notes. So it won't be a guess. Something either in the notes section at the start of the case notes or within the case notes will explain that the person you're writing to has an existing relationship with the patient. So if that isn't given anywhere, you can assume that this is a new point of contact for the patient with this healthcare professional. Salah on YouTube is asking for tips for reading and listening part A and B. So Salah, hopefully you've seen those playlists that I have sent through for you. I've already given a few tips at the same time of talking around those topics, for example, particularly checking spelling for reading and listening part A. For reading and listening part B, I did touch on making sure that you spend time to understand the question carefully enough, that you're not sort of jumping to conclusions about what you're listening for. And remember that with part B and part C questions, to be honest, you're not trying to match a word that's in the question or answer options with something that is said or that you read. You're looking for the overall meaning of the short extract in part B. So a single word matching is not enough evidence for that being the correct answer. You really need to be focusing in on the overall meaning of the text, either audio or written text, to be making a choice on whether your answer is correct. Ishwarya, you've got your test coming up in around 10 days' time, or 2 weeks, like you said. So what should you concentrate on? And you said you took the test last August, but you didn't get the score that you wanted in listening. As it's been some time since you've taken the test, Ishwarya, although nothing has changed since you took the test last August, I wouldn't just focus on listening, which could be your tendency. You know, that was the score that you didn't get as you wished a year ago. But I would still make sure to spend part of all of these 2 weeks checking and revising all of the subtests. We've certainly added a new listening sample test to the website, OET Sample Test 5, since you last took the test. So make sure that you have had a look at that sample test. Those listening and reading week playlists will also be great for you. But make sure you balance it with some speaking and writing. What can happen for candidates if they go for a resit is they focus heavily on the subtest that they didn't get the score that they wanted the first time around. And then in the second test, they get the score they want in that subtest, but because they hadn't paid enough attention to another subtest, they then miss out on the score they wanted there. So it's really good to maintain balance on your preparation so that you're not sort of really prioritizing one skill over another, but doing more sort of general balanced practice. Vanil on YouTube says, can I ask if 1 month preparation for OET is enough for me to reach my goal of a B for each subtest except writing, which is a C+? So Vanil, that's an excellent question. It really depends on a couple of things. The first thing it depends on is how close you are to those goals already. So if you are already roughly a B for the 3 subtests and roughly a C+ for a writing test, then a month is ample time for you to get ready for the test. If, however, you're more C's at the moment, and so getting to a B is a bigger jump, a bigger stretch, then it's likely that it will take a little bit longer than a month to get you there. The other thing that you need to consider is how much time within that month can you dedicate to your study and your preparation. If you're working full time, you've got lots of family commitments, other kinds of things going on, you're only going to be able to spare, a couple of hours once or twice a week. You need to make sure you're factoring that into your decision on when you want to take the test. Whereas on the other hand, if you're able to study part-time or even full-time for this next month, then again, if your language is already close to the results that you want and you've got plenty of time available to you to prepare, a month can well be all the time that you need. So the point is to be realistic with yourself. If you know that you need more time than what you've planned because of your commitments or your current language level, then give yourself that time. Don't add to your stress by, setting yourself a goal that's just a little bit too far out of your reach. Give yourself time to prepare. It's great for everybody if you're successful first time around. We love it when our candidates pass the test straight away and go on to their healthcare dreams. It comes down to preparing properly and with the right realistic framework for yourself. Bobbin, I suppose, is coming at this from a similar angle. So, Bobbin, you're saying your wife has taken the test 5 times, but the reading and listening scores are not improving. So, Bobbin, simply by retaking the test is not going to improve your wife's scores. The reason for this is, which you might not be familiar with, is that each test, the questions and topics are different. So it's not like she can build on her experience from the previous test to improve on it for the next time around. All that is improving, I guess, from taking the test many times is that she knows what to expect. She knows the format of the test very well. She's familiar with the test venue and that sort of thing. But in terms of it improving her listening and reading scores, we wouldn't encourage her to take the test again until she has worked on those skills outside of the test environment. And to do that, things like those playlists that I've linked into the comments earlier, things like the courses that are available from our website, things like the live sessions that our All-Stars deliver a couple of times a week. Things like actually studying with an accredited teacher, which can be found on our website. All of these things will help your wife improve her reading and listening scores. And then is the time to go back and have another time at the test. Jessa says, what if the writing task states to write a discharge letter while on the action plan states write a referral letter? Jessa, I can only imagine that these are some kind of unofficial materials that you've come across. This certainly wouldn't happen in a live test or in any of the sample tests available from the OET website. And this is really a good example of how you as candidates need to be very cautious about accessing materials which are not from the OET website or any of our accredited partners, because you could be shown really misleading examples, poor quality materials. So you need to be careful. You need to study from our website what is the format, what's going to happen, what can you expect to see, and using our sample tests to get a good sense of what the format is really important. And then when you come across a letter like this or a set of case notes, you'd be able to tell that this is not right. This is not how it would happen in OET. And you could say, I'm not going to study with these materials because if that's not right, there could be other things that are not right. And these are actually going to do me more harm than good. Asha on YouTube says, have there been any changes to the marking criteria or are they still tough? So Asha, there haven't been any changes to the marking criteria. In terms of them still being tough, they're only tough in terms of whether candidates have the right level of English to get the scores that those writing criteria or speaking criteria evidence. So we don't set those requirements. Those are set by the regulators who want a B grade or a C plus grade from candidates. That's the level of English that they are requiring, and our marking criteria just provide the evidence of whether a candidate has met those requirements or not met those requirements. So for a candidate who's already at a B grade level or a C plus level, they're quite straightforward to evidence to meet those requirements. If you're finding those criteria tough to meet, to me it suggests a little bit like the previous question, you need to pause to do some more work on your language skills before considering taking the test again. Tarek on Facebook says, will OET ever allow candidates to attempt the different subtests separately? So, for example, listening and reading together while speaking and writing. I wonder if you mean on another date. So, Tarek, no, not as a rule. There's a lot of logistics that would go into separating the subtests onto different dates. The other part of it is it comes down to the regulators who set the requirements, as I was just mentioning, that in the majority of cases, they require all 4 subtests to be done on the same session so that they are getting the standard of a candidate's English on one particular date and time. So, and unless the regulators were going to make a change to that requirement, OET essentially sets the test in a way that meets the regulators' requests and requirements. So while I can empathise that you might prefer to be able to take those subtests on different days, as I say, it comes down to logistics and the requirements from the regulators. Fuz says, what about medication if we write without an S, for example, beta blockers or blocker? So Fuz, plurals are something that is, to be honest, quite basic in terms of understanding English. It's something that's learned in sort of introductory, elementary levels of English, that we know there's a difference between one apple and some apples or 2 apples. We know that where there is more than one of something, that we need to add an S. So that would be expected in types of medication like beta blockers, that you are including that S on the end, because beta blocker would mean 1, and someone who's demonstrating their language level to be a B grade or higher is expected to know that a plural S is correct in that sentence. So again, it really comes back to your checking time, setting yourself or creating for yourself, as you prepare for the test, your own personal checklist, things that you sometimes forget to do. So it could be that you write your checklist as you're preparing, and for you it's like, I need to check whether something's got a plural S on the end. I need to check if my handwriting is legible, for example. Whatever your particular weaknesses are when it comes to the test, that checklist just acts as a reminder to you about what you need to check in the time that's provided. This question from Aswathi, who says, can you please explain to us the percentage symbol and percentage the word? If the question asks what percentage, is the answer 1% or 1? So I think there I've just given you the answer, that symbol, the word for that symbol is percent. It's not percentage. So when the question asks what percentage, the answer is 1% with the symbol, because that is the correct grammatical answer. Now, I know that seems a little bit complex, but that's essentially how the English works. And so you need to include the percent symbol as part of your answer when percentage is included in the question. And we cover that in more detail, perhaps than I've just been able to explain there, in one of those blog articles that I mentioned a little bit earlier. If you go to the link that I provided earlier, which takes you to our blog pages, and look through the blogs that we have for reading, there's a really good one for reading Part A, which covers this question exactly with an example. It also covers not repeating words that are in the question, and other sort of top tips about reading Part A. So that's from our blog article page. I linked to it earlier in the comments, and it's just another example of how much information is available for you from OET.com. Another question from Jessa: how many days are there scheduling time for the speaking subtest? So this depends on whether you take OET on paper or OET on computer at a venue, or even OET at home. So when you take OET on paper, your speaking test is scheduled for the same day as your listening, reading and writing tests. If you take OET on computer at a venue or OET at home, there's a bigger flexibility. Your speaking test might actually be before or after your other tests on a different day entirely. And you can see the availability for that, for those speaking slots. They start a couple of days before and go for a couple of days after the test date for listening, reading and writing on computer or at home. And you can choose one that's appropriate and that you will be available to do. Shirley on YouTube says, does official OET have coaching? Shirley, we recommend teachers who can help you with coaching. So from our study with a teacher page, there's a list of schools and private teachers who have been vetted by OET, who have completed extensive training with OET, for us to know that they know what they're doing, that they're qualified, that they have excellent skills and ability to support our candidates. So if you are interested in studying with a teacher, something I would definitely recommend. Teachers can work with you on a personal level to understand your strengths and weaknesses. They can explain how to develop your skills. They can try out different strategies with you to find out what works. There's a lot that a teacher can do that you just can't do from being on your own. So it's definitely a good investment if that's an availability for you. Mimansa on Facebook says, is it okay to write GERD instead of gastroesophageal reflux disease for the writing test? Let's say I'm referring my patient to a gastroenterologist. Yes, Mimansa, you've given an excellent example there. Advice about abbreviations or even acronyms in this case is that it needs to be appropriate for the person that you're writing to. So I wouldn't write GERD, for example, perhaps to a physiotherapist for who that wouldn't necessarily be a very familiar acronym. But where the person reading your letter knows that acronym, would be using it probably on a daily basis, it is appropriate to use in your writing to them. Antidote is saying, do you have any tips on how to get a 400 plus in writing? So actually this is a really helpful, I had been meaning to talk about this earlier in the session, so this is a great way for me to segue into it. So thank you for asking. I wanted to check with candidates, I'm asking this every time we do one of these Q&A sessions, about whether you have yet to use our graded sample booklets. Now these are resources that we introduced earlier in the year. I'm going to add the link to the comments now. And these graded sample booklets, there's one for writing, there's one for speaking. They include 30 candidate samples from across 10 of the OET professions. And they are graded by assessors with a letter grade. and with a comment about what are the strengths and weaknesses of each letter or each audio. So you can listen to the actual candidates completing their sample test. It's sample test 5 from the website, so it's one that you can also practice yourself. You can also read the candidates' letters that they produced for sample test 5 case notes and compare these with your own writing. Now, certainly for some of the professions, we have A grade samples provided. So if you're someone who's looking for a 400, which is a high B grade, certainly looking at the difference between what an A grade gets in terms of a comment or a B grade gets in terms of a comment should highlight to you the difference in what the assessors are looking for from those assessment criteria. So these are really good resources. Every time we ask candidates about this on the Q&A sessions, we're not hearing back from candidates that they know about this as a resource. So I strongly recommend after this session ends to check out all of the links that I've posted into the comments. This one I think you would be silly to miss out on. I can't speak highly of it. I think it's a really fantastic resource that all candidates should download, even print off and really study. There's some tips at the front about how you can make the most of the booklet, and it's free, so you can't go wrong. All right, let's go for a couple more questions before we wrap up from today. Oh, this is nice. It's nice when we hear from some success. So Gouda on YouTube is saying you finally got the score that you wanted in reading. So congratulations. We wish you all the best for your future healthcare career, and we hope you go on to have a really successful career using English. Congratulations. Mo on Facebook says, in listening, is the spelling counted for minor mistakes like one letter? So Mo, I'll refer you back to the answer that I gave earlier in the session, because there I had a fantastic example, which I think a candidate provided without meaning to, but it really explains that point clearly. So we're nearly at the end of today's session. Once it finishes, go back and have a listen to that question that came earlier on, and I think that will give you your answer. Sorry. Abina on Facebook says, please, why can't we write the subtest that we couldn't make, writing the whole subtest again? As I was saying, Abina, this is also for you to go back and listen to a little bit earlier in the session. Not that long ago, in fact, I covered this question, that it comes down to the regulators' requirements, and our regulators require that candidates take the test on one single date. So they're getting a snapshot of your language from that date. And they set the requirement that if you need to do a resit, they want to see your language from all 4 subtests again on a different date to see if your language is still meeting their requirements. So I'm sorry, that's not something OET has any control over. Mansa on Facebook is saying, where is the examiner from when we are giving OET at home? So just to clarify, Mansa, when you take listening, reading and writing for OET at home, you're being watched through your camera by somebody called a remote proctor, and this person has no part to play in your test result. They are simply watching you to make sure you're not doing anything you shouldn't be doing, but also to make sure that if anything goes wrong during your test, they're on hand to support you. When you complete your speaking test for OET at home or for OET on computer, you're completing that through Zoom with an interlocutor who is taking the role of your patient or carer during the speaking test. Now, the interlocutor, and this is true for the paper test as well, is not your examiner. They, again, have no influence on the score that you receive for your speaking test. They are simply there to complete the role play with you, to take the part of your patient or the relative. They could be from a number of places around the world. So I can't specify for you where they will be. But as I said, the interlocutor is only there to facilitate the test. They are not scoring you. All right, I think we've run out of unique questions. The couple of questions I can see coming through now, again, these are questions I have already covered earlier on in the session, so please do check back for those answers once the session ends in a few minutes. Before I do end the session, I wanted to call out our all-star sessions. I covered a little bit earlier. These were a way of helping you improve your skills. We run 2 live all-star sessions from some of our premium preparation partners a couple of times a week. There was one just yesterday, which was from Ashcroft Medical English. Joan was covering listening. Listening Part C, and that session is now available for you to watch if you couldn't attend live. That's available to watch from Artificial OET YouTube channel, and she's giving you her best tips and strategies for how you can answer Part C questions correctly and to improve your confidence, because we know a lot of candidates are having some concerns about being able to follow an audio for the length of time that listening Part C is. And then our partners at SET English are delivering a session on Thursday, excuse me, which is on speaking. And they're focusing specifically on how you can deliver active listening skills as part of your speaking role play. So another really great session there for you to watch. That will be happening live on Thursday from OET YouTube. Next week we have sessions on reading and writing coming up. So even if you're taking your test next weekend, there's still time to join some of those live sessions and to benefit from the experience and expertise of those teachers delivering those sessions. So do check them out. It's another free resource that you can make use of. Now, before I finish today's session, I just want to let you know when our next Q&A live session will be. It's coming up 2 weeks today. Again, another Tuesday, the 29th of October. We're nearly at the end of the month already. I can't believe it. My colleague Shekinah will be leading this session. She will, exactly as I have done here, work her way through as many of the questions that you submit excuse me, in the hour, and be on hand to support you with whatever it is that you need to get ready for your test. Thank you to everyone who's joined me today. Final reminder, do check out all the links that I've shared with you during today's session. And for those of you taking the test next weekend, I hope you have a great test day experience. Thanks for joining me, and bye for now.